So you're looking for a portable power station, but you also need a way to quickly recharge while you're on the go, in the car perhaps. And you're wondering which ecosystem, which brand should you go with? Well, I'm glad you asked, because today I'm going to be comparing power stations and chargers from two mainstream players, DJI and EcoFlow. Now, I said mainstream players because there are a ton of new brands popping up in the portable power station space. I mean, literally every week there's more and more of them trying to get into this space. But in my opinion, there really are only about half a dozen or so brands that I would consider mainstream. Now, you've probably heard of DJI. I mean, they are the most popular drone company in the world. But maybe you didn't realize that they recently have started developing products in the portable power station space. And you know, it makes sense if you think about it, because they have extensive knowledge about batteries, about power, you know, given the way that their drones run off batteries. And so today, DJI has asked me to do a comparison on their latest offerings against EcoFlow's more established products. And so I'm going to point out all their similarities and differences, and that way you can decide which platform is best for you. And by the way, folks, do me a favor and leave comments down below throughout the video about what you like and dislike about all the products here, especially the DJI ones, since they're new to the market, and that way they can take your feedback and improve upon. Now, I'm going to start out by talking about ecosystems, kind of like, are you a Mac person or a Windows person, right? Are you an iPhone user or Android? And you know, really, once you get into a particular ecosystem, it just kind of makes sense to stay within it. And so I think to a certain degree that is true in the portable power station world. And so on the right, I have DJI's Power 1000, along with their fast charger. I'll be talking about all of these products right here. And then over here on the left, I've got EcoFlow's Delta 2, along with their competing Alternator Charger right here. Now, I've done an in-depth video on this Alternator Charger when it first came out, and so I'll put a card up above if you're interested in all those details. EcoFlow is one of the first mainstream players really to come out with one of these DC to DC, you know, I'll just call them superchargers, because they rapidly recharge their power stations. But this is the first video I've done featuring DJI's products, and so I think it'll be interesting to see how they compare, because DJI is arguably a bit later to the game, so to speak, right? I mean, all the other mainstream brands like Bluetti, EcoFlow, and others, they have had, you know, power stations out for years. And then most of these brands like EcoFlow have launched their chargers, their fast chargers, within the last year or so. I mean, this one came out almost a year ago. And I bring that up to start out this comparison because DJI being a little bit late to the game, I think in a way they have used that to their advantage, you know, to almost benchmark against the existing competition. And I'll explain that throughout the video. So that being said, I'm going to start the comparison with the power stations here, because the DC to DC chargers offered by both DJI and EcoFlow, basically they're designed to work with their own power stations. So if you go with the EcoFlow Alternator Charger here, you're going to need to use the EcoFlow power stations. Same with DJI. If you go with their fast charger here, you're going to need to use the DJI power stations. Now, I will mention briefly that there is another mainstream brand, Bluetti, that does offer a DC to DC charger where you're not locked into a certain ecosystem. I did a video demonstration on that one, so I'll put a card above. But the Bluetti Charger 1, it's limited to about 560 watts max. So it's not quite as fast as we'll see later in the video compared to the EcoFlow and the DJI right here. And so let's start out by doing a quick comparison between these power stations. I'm going to throw a bunch of numbers up on the screen, a bunch of specs. We've got, of course, the EcoFlow Delta 2 on the left and the DJI Power 1000 on the right. So check out the different specs there and how they compare. Really, they're going to be a similar size and a similar weight. Different form factor. You know, really from this angle, the EcoFlow looks a lot smaller than the DJI, but I'll go over that later. But I mean, look at the weight. They're very similar right there, 28 versus 27 pounds, same battery inside. But then when you get to the rest of the specs, almost all of them you're going to notice, I think this is really interesting, that the DJI Power 1000, it kind of one-upped the Delta 2 from EcoFlow and almost all the other specs right there. They just took the specs that were already really good on the EcoFlow Delta 2 and just kind of bumped them up just a little bit. So spec-wise, on paper at least, the DJI appears to have the upper hand compared to the Delta 2, but let's look at how these stack up in a real-world use case scenario. So first I'm going to turn them the same direction, the same orientation, so you can get a better sense of how they differ in size. You can see the DJI is a little bit shorter, but also a little bit wider compared to the EcoFlow. Let's turn them both the same way this direction here. And I'll back up a little bit, and you can see, again, very similar. I mean, the DJI is a little bit wider right here compared to the EcoFlow, but again, the EcoFlow is a little bit taller. So, I mean, they're really essentially about the same size. Again, almost the same weight, 27, 28 pounds. Let's take a look at their ports, though, because this is where I think it gets very different between the two. You'll notice in the same orientation, the DJI has all the ports right here, all of them. There's no ports on the side, on the back, everything's right here. But on the EcoFlow, they've taken a different approach. And this is really interesting, I think. They have very similar screens. By the way, I'll just point that out. You can see very similar screens. But notice here on the EcoFlow, they've got all the USB ports on this side, right here. They've got different USB-A ports, fast charge and regular ones, and then 2 USB-C ports right there, and an on-off for that, plus the main power. So that's on this side with the screen. Notice how, again, everything right here on the DJI is on one side. The AC ports are on the opposite side on the EcoFlow. And this is something that's very different, like I said, between the two units, just that approach. I'm not sure why EcoFlow split everything up. You know, for me, it's always been a little awkward because I'm flipping it around or getting to different sides. I'm sure there are use cases where this makes sense to have things split on opposing sides. But for me, that's one thing that I've always thought is just a little bit odd on the EcoFlow. But that being said, I do want to point out, look how many AC ports you get. You get 2 nice high-powered ones with the ground, the 3-prong, and then you get 4 more 2-prong. So that's pretty interesting. And then down here, check this out. You get 2 DC barrel plugs, and you get a conventional 12-volt DC car port here on the EcoFlow. And then up above, we've got all the inputs, the AC input for charging and DC for solar. Compare that to the DJI over here. And again, everything is together on one side. But notice on the AC, we have 2 outlets. They're high-powered outlets, 3-prong there. We've got our USB-A, USB-C ports, which, by the way, the USB-C ports on the DJI here, 140 watts, compared to the USB-C on the EcoFlow, 100 watts. So a little bit higher powered over here. Now, a lot of times phones and tablets may only take up to 100 watts. So really the 140, I think, is more beneficial if you're going to be charging a MacBook or something, you know, that takes higher than 100 watts. So that's kind of interesting. And then over here, we've got our AC input for charging. But check this out right here. This is really interesting. I don't think I've ever seen this before on a power station. DJI has put a switch right here that lets you throttle the input wattage for charging. You know, most power stations make you do this in an app, and DJI has just put a switch here. You can go from 600 to 1200 with just a flip of the switch. Pretty interesting. But then it gets even more interesting, I think, over here. You've got these ports labeled SDC, Super DC. And this is something unique to DJI. This one up top is the high-powered SDC port, and then down here, you've got an SDC Lite. And you'll notice that something's actually plugged into this one already. This is actually what they call a dongle, and it basically adds Bluetooth and Wi-Fi connectivity to the Power Station 1000. Now, I'm not sure how I feel about this, because you heard me right. In order to connect to the app on your phone, you have to have this dongle, this little module, plugged into the device. Without this, you will not be able to connect to your phone. So it's kind of interesting that DJI separated this. At first when I saw that, I thought, why did they do that? And then I started thinking about just real world use case scenarios. And for me, when I use power stations, very rarely am I connecting through the app to look at it on my phone. I mean, typically I'm looking at the screen. It's just much faster. And so I started thinking, I really don't use the app that often on power stations. But I don't know, there's part of me that still wishes that this was just built in because, maybe I'm in a situation somewhere where I forget this module and I want to connect on the phone app through Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, and I don't have this module with me. So let me know what you guys think about that. I think that's a very interesting choice there. But let me pull this out so you can get a closer look at what these SDC ports look like. Again, up here is the SDC port, and down here is the SDC Lite. And really, this is something entirely unique to the DJI Power Station. I mean, basically, these are versatile in-out DC ports that you can plug solar into. You can, if you want to have a conventional 12-volt, car port, you can take this right here and plug it into one of the SDC ports. And then because this is DJI, you can charge their drones, and not just charge them, but fast charge them through the SDC ports. And I think that is one thing, again, that really sets this power station apart, is that you can fast charge DJI drones. And so if you have DJI drones, you're out in the field, the batteries can take a while to recharge even through the, fast powered AC chargers. Basically, this power station will recharge the DJI drones faster than you could charge through AC power. And so that's really where I think this power station starts to become a game changer if you're in the DJI drone world and you need to quickly recharge your drones. I mean, this is going to do it faster than the conventional AC power chargers. Now, again, I'll just point out that you only get 2 of these SDC ports. And so if I want to use a 12-volt car port, I have to occupy one of the SDC ports on the DJI, whereas on the EcoFlow, that's built in. I'm always going to have that 12-volt port right there. And so really, you just got to think about your specific use case. I mean, if you want to recharge the DJI 1000 with solar, well, again, you're going to have to occupy one of the SDC slots. Whereas on the EcoFlow, it has that dedicated port right there for solar. So I think DJI has taken a really unique approach with their power station, by cleaning up the number of inputs and outputs. And I think if you think through your specific use case, chances are you're going to have just enough ports right here, not in excess, but just enough. Now, in terms of connectivity, like I mentioned for the DJI, you do have to have this little dongle right here for Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. I will throw up some screenshots of the different apps. They're very similar both on the DJI and the EcoFlow right there. I mean, you see all the basic stats, and of course you've got settings that you can change as well. I've used both of the apps fairly extensively, no issues there on connectivity, and of course via Wi-Fi they give you even greater, remote connectivity where you can monitor pretty much anywhere in the world. So that's pretty neat. Now, let me real briefly just talk about build quality, because like I said, there are a ton of new power stations emerging in this space. And my biggest critique of the newer brands, I get approached by a lot of different companies wanting me to test their power stations. And my biggest critique of a lot of these brands is the build quality just leaves a lot to be desired. Whereas, over here, EcoFlow, they've been around for quite some time, very established, and their build quality has always really impressed me. I mean, I really think they have the build quality down. So how does that stack up against, DJI over here, given that this is really their first iteration, their first foray into the power station space? Well, DJI has been around actually longer than EcoFlow when it comes to the drone space. I mean, they are the most popular drone brand. I think last time I checked, they're over something like 70% market share in the drone space. And I've actually owned and worked with DJI drones all the way back to around 2015 or so with their Phantom 3 series. And I'll just say that when I think about where DJI has come in the drone space, dating back to, circa 2015 or so, I got to say that they have vastly improved on their build quality, their features. I mean, just over the last decade is very impressive. And so I mention all that because I think DJI has tapped into their expertise, in engineering and manufacturing, And they've leveraged that as they've gone into the power station space here. And so even though this is their first iteration, I see a very similar build quality compared to the EcoFlow. It feels very solid, very well built. And so I think DJI has essentially, leveraged that, even though they're new to the power station space. Okay, so quick summary. I don't think you can go wrong with either power station. We saw on paper that the DJI kind of one-upped the EcoFlow on just about all the specs, but at the same time, the EcoFlow has a lot more dedicated ports, AC and DC, that are just built into the power station. Of course, if you have DJI drones, well, the DJI power station is going to charge those drones up much faster compared to plugging in through AC with the EcoFlow. So I really think you just have to think about your use case scenario and how you plan to use the power stations and determine, which one is going to meet your needs the best. Okay, so that is the power stations. Let's compare next the DC to DC chargers. I've got the DJI Power 1 kilowatt, the super fast charger on the right here, and then I've got the EcoFlow 800 watt alternator charger here on the left. And let me just answer a question first, and that is, why do you need one of these fast chargers in the first place, right? Why not just plug it into a 12 volt port on your vehicle? Well, you certainly can do that, but you're going to be limited really to a maximum of 100 watts of charging with really both of these brands. And so the purpose of having one of these DC to DC chargers is it basically takes your car's alternator and turns it into a supercharger so that you can charge at a much faster rate. 800 watts here on the EcoFlow compared to 1,000 watts here on the DJI. And so that means basically, 8 to 10 times faster. You're going to be charging these guys up within 1 to 2 hours. So that's why a DC to DC charger is so useful. Let's look at how they're different between the DJI and the EcoFlow. I mean, obviously by their names alone, you can tell with the DJI being 1 kilowatt or 1,000 watts, it's going to support slightly higher charging rate compared to the EcoFlow alternator charger, which is going to be capped at about 800 watts. And so that certainly is a slight advantage. But remember, these are intended to work with their respective brands. So the DJI charger is going to work with the DJI Power Station, and same with the EcoFlow. And so at this point, I really think the chargers are more or less just going to sway you toward one of these different ecosystems. Now, I have extensively used the EcoFlow here, and it works as promised. Get close to the 800 watts of charging with their power stations. I have not used the DJI fast charger yet, but I plan to extensively test it, and I have no reason to believe I won't get, up to the 1,000 watts of charging. And so how are these two DC chargers really different? And the biggest thing that stands out to me with these two units is the form factor alone. I mean, just look at the different shapes and sizes. They have taken a very different approach. This is more of a rectangle, almost about the size of a brick, if I can use that comparison, whereas this one is very flat, kind of like a pancake. And so I think the form factor comes into play when you think about where you would install one of these DC to DC chargers, because it all comes down to the footprint of these devices. I mean, that is a huge part of the install. So if I put them side by side, you can see just how vastly different the footprint is. We've got the DJI super fast car charger and the EcoFlow alternator charger here, very different footprints. So think about in your vehicle where you might install one of these, how much, space and clearance do you have to mount one of these devices? And like I said before, I have tested the EcoFlow alternator charger and demoed it, and I actually did not end up installing this in that previous video because I could not find a suitable location. This was a Jeep Wrangler JK. I could not find a suitable location to fit this, at least where I wanted it to go, because of this footprint. You have to have a fairly, large flat space to mount this on. Yes, it's flat like a pancake, but you have to have a good bit of space for that footprint. Whereas on the DJI super fast car charger, it has a much smaller footprint. So just an observation, I do think that the smaller footprint on this device here on the DJI opens up more possibilities when it comes to install locations. I mean, even if I was going to mount one of these in the back of my truck bed, right? I mean, you've got all kinds of different shapes, you know, where the different sections of the bed are pushed in and out. And so the smaller the footprint, really the easier the install is. And so I think that's very interesting between the two. You just got to think through where are you going to install this, which one of these form factors is going to fit better for you. Now, other differences. They both pretty much have the same concept in terms of giving you the long umbilical cord, and you connect that obviously to your vehicle's battery. They're both a little over 16 feet long right there. And then of course that's going to connect to the Alternator Charger or the super fast charger in the case of the DJI. So that's going to be very similar. But let me point out a difference concerning the connectors. Check out here on the EcoFlow, they've got these really unique proprietary connectors and they look really neat. I mean, they have a very high build quality, obviously, but this is proprietary. And so you'll notice that on the end of the cables that are supplied, they have these proprietary connectors. So that's kind of interesting. In fact, there is a special tool that you have to use once you attach these to release them. So that's kind of unique. There's no screws or anything involved, but it is proprietary. Compare that over here on the DJI, and they basically have just standard, you know, ring terminals really that connect here. And so I could see that as an advantage if, you know, maybe you need a longer cable and you want to make up your own cable. Well, with the DJI, it's no problem because they're just ring terminals, essentially. And so you could make your own. Whereas on the EcoFlow, you probably could splice this somehow, but it's not going to be quite as neat and clean in the end. Otherwise, they're both very similar in terms of being able to monitor through Bluetooth with the companion phone app and see all the different settings and the charge rate. So that's nice. Of course, they both give you all the install parts, you know, the cable, even the inline fuse on both of them there. So I really think at the end of the day, it just comes down to, you know, does the 800 watts versus the 1000 make a difference to you, right? Because that is going to be slightly faster. And then really more importantly, the form factor. For me, that's the biggest thing. Can you fit this form factor with the footprint into your vehicle where you want to install it, right? Or is the DJI going to work out better? Again, I think this is more universal, but I'm sure there's a handful of applications where this flatter footprint is going to work out better. So, you know, what's right for your application? Okay, well, let me close out the video and give you some final thoughts on this comparison, DJI versus EcoFlow. Like I said before, they're both great power stations, great brands. And so I think they're very competitive between the two. By the way, on the pricing, they're going to be about the same. They're both going to have their list price, and then they're going to run sales and promotions. And so I think at the end of the day, the final price you're going to pay, and that goes for the power stations and the chargers, it's going to be about the same between the two. So we've got EcoFlow, you know, they've made a name for themselves, very established in the power station space. And then we've got DJI, you know, this is their first iteration into the power station space, yet arguably DJI has been around longer than EcoFlow making drones. And so like I said before, I do think DJI being a little bit later to the game, they've kind of leveraged that to their advantage, benchmark off of the competition, and I think they have taken their engineering experience, their manufacturing, and, you know, put that into their power stations. So who wins in the end, right? And I think it comes down to the unique use case, right? I mean, everyone's application of how they use these products is different. And I think it's that unique application that's going to dictate whether you should go with the DJI versus the EcoFlow. And so for me personally, if I had to make a hard decision right now between these two different platforms, these two different ecosystems, essentially, in my personal opinion, I think that the DJI platform offers some unique advantages over the EcoFlow. I'm not saying it's perfect. There are some things I like better that I pointed out about the EcoFlow, but overall, I like more things about this DJI platform with the power station and the super fast charger compared to the EcoFlow. I'm not saying it's a knockout, but that's just for me personally. And so I think you've got to think through how you're going to use the product and let that dictate which one of these is going to serve your needs best. But let me know what you think in the comments below. And like I said, leave your feedback for the manufacturers, both DJI and EcoFlow, so that they know what you like and dislike about their products. Just a couple more things I want to mention. I do have some other video ideas, especially for the DJI Power 1000 that I plan in the future, such as, testing with my RV and really putting it to the limits there. But if you guys have any other videos that you'd like to see, other comparisons or use case applications with either of these, definitely drop me a comment below. If you have questions about the product, drop me a comment below and I'll do my best to answer. And then last, if you want to purchase one of these products, I will include affiliate links down below along with any discount or coupon codes so that you can get the best price possible. So I appreciate you using those to help support the channel. As always, thanks for watching.